Put him in the back seat now, the officer ordered, his voice cutting through the morning air with enough authority to make every conversation outside the federal building fall silent. Two uniformed police officers stood beside a patrol vehicle with their attention fixed on a calm black man dressed in a charcoal business suit. His hands remained visible at his sides, his posture relaxed despite the growing crowd gathering along the sidewalk. Around them, federal employees paused halfway up the courthouse steps, tourists stopped taking photographs, and commuters slowed to watch what appeared to be the arrest of someone claiming to be an FBI agent. The sunlight reflected off the glass walls of the downtown federal complex, casting long shadows across the concrete plaza as a police officer reached for the rear door of the patrol car. Just before it closed, the distant sound of approaching engines echoed through the street. A line of identical black sport utility vehicles turned the corner with synchronized precision. Their headlights glimmered beneath the bright morning sky, but no one yet understood why they were there. 9 minutes earlier, the morning had begun like hundreds before it. Ethan Brooks eased his pickup truck into the drop-off lane outside Jefferson Elementary School, smiling as his 10-year-old son Noah gathered his backpack from the passenger seat. The science fair medal hanging around Noah's neck bounced lightly against his jacket as he climbed out. "Do not forget," Ethan said with a grin. "The trophy is nice, but what matters most is that you kept trying after your first experiment failed." Noah laughed. "You have said that at least 10 times already." Ethan smiled even wider. "That is because it is worth hearing 11. Noah leaned through the open window before heading toward the school entrance. "Will you make it to my baseball practice tonight?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. "I would not miss it." Father and son exchanged one quick fist bump before Noah disappeared into the crowd of students streaming toward the front doors. Ethan remained parked for a moment, watching until his son safely entered the building. Only then did he pull away, the faint smile still resting on his face. His route to the downtown FBI field office always included one small stop. A neighborhood coffee shop sat only a few blocks from the federal building, and the employees already knew his order before he reached the counter. "Large black coffee?" the barista asked with a smile. "And one blueberry muffin," Ethan replied. "I promised myself I would skip it today, but apparently my willpower stayed home." The young woman laughed as she handed him the warm paper bag. "Good luck keeping that promise tomorrow." Ethan thanked her, tucked the receipt into his pocket, and stepped back onto the sidewalk. The city was fully awake now. Office workers hurried toward glass towers with briefcases in hand. Delivery trucks rolled past construction crews. American flags outside government buildings fluttered gently in the cool breeze. Ethan enjoyed these quiet walks because they gave him a few uninterrupted minutes before another demanding day began. He adjusted the leather messenger bag resting across his shoulder and continued toward the federal complex without the slightest hint that his routine was about to disappear. At almost the same moment, several blocks away, a patrol unit received an urgent radio bulletin. Witnesses had reported someone impersonating a federal agent near a financial office less than a mile away. The preliminary description was frustratingly vague. African-American male, dark business suit, messenger bag, approximately 6 feet tall. Officers were instructed to locate anyone matching the description until investigators could gather additional information. Officer Ryan Mitchell acknowledged the call immediately. As his patrol car turned onto the avenue leading toward the federal building, he spotted a man whose appearance seemed to fit every detail he had just heard. Without realizing it, he had already decided what he believed to be true. Officer Ryan Mitchell eased his patrol vehicle against the curb just as Ethan Brooks reached the wide staircase leading toward the federal building. The flashing emergency lights reflected across the polished glass entrance, drawing curious glances from government employees arriving for work. Ethan slowed his pace, assuming the officers were responding to something unrelated nearby. Instead, Mitchell stepped directly into his path. "Sir, I need you to stop right there," he said in a firm but controlled voice. Ethan immediately complied, shifting his coffee into his left hand while keeping both hands clearly visible. "Good morning, officer," he replied calmly. "How can I help you?" Mitchell studied the man standing before him. Dark business suit, messenger bag, African-American male, height nearly identical to the dispatch description. Every visible detail seemed to reinforce the conclusion already forming in his mind. "Do you have identification with you?" Mitchell asked. Ethan nodded politely. Yes, sir. My identification is inside my wallet. It is in the inside pocket of my jacket. I can retrieve it slowly if you would like. Mitchell held up one hand. Do not reach for anything yet. Ethan immediately lowered his hand again without hesitation. Of course. A second patrol vehicle rolled to a stop nearby, and another uniformed officer stepped onto the sidewalk to assist. People entering the federal building instinctively slowed their pace. Some pretended not to watch, while others openly paused several yards away. The quiet murmur of the downtown morning gradually faded beneath the growing curiosity surrounding the encounter. Ethan maintained steady eye contact without appearing confrontational. Officer, may I ask what this concerns? Mitchell answered without softening his expression. We are investigating someone suspected of impersonating a federal agent. Ethan gave a small nod of understanding. I see. Mitchell waited for surprise, denial, or frustration. Instead, he found only measured patience. Somehow that composure unsettled him more than an emotional reaction might have. Where are you headed this morning? Mitchell continued. Ethan turned his head slightly toward the federal building behind the officers. To work. Doing what? Federal law enforcement. Mitchell folded his arms. That is a serious claim. Ethan answered in the same respectful tone. It is not a claim. It is my profession. The second officer quietly circled a few steps to Ethan's side while remaining several feet away. Mitchell spoke into the radio clipped to his shoulder, requesting a preliminary records check using the limited information he had observed. Dispatch replied that verification could take several minutes because investigators were simultaneously processing information related to the active impersonation report. Mitchell looked back toward Ethan. Until we verify who you are, I need you to remain here. I understand, Ethan replied. I have no intention of leaving. The calm response drew the attention of an elderly security guard standing near the building entrance. He recognized Ethan from countless mornings over the past several years, but before he could step forward, another employee quietly touched his arm. Let the officers handle it, she whispered. The guard hesitated, uncertain whether intervening would help or complicate the situation. Ethan noticed the familiar face, but made no effort to call out. Years of federal training had taught him that unnecessary movement could easily create additional misunderstanding during a police encounter. He simply stood where he had been instructed, coffee cooling in one hand, while the leather strap of his messenger bag rested neatly across his shoulder. Mitchell interpreted the disciplined stillness differently. To him, it suggested someone who had carefully rehearsed how to behave during police questioning. The longer Ethan remained composed, the more convinced Mitchell became that he was dealing with someone experienced in deception rather than someone with nothing to hide. Across the plaza, several pedestrians quietly lifted their phones, sensing that something unusual was unfolding outside the federal building. None of them realized that within only a few minutes, the assumptions filling the sidewalk would begin to collapse under the weight of a very different truth. Officer Ryan Mitchell slowly circled Ethan Brooks, studying every detail with growing certainty instead of growing caution. The expensive business suit, the polished dress shoes, the leather messenger bag, and the composed expression all seemed to confirm the story he had already constructed in his mind. Ethan remained exactly where he had been instructed, holding his coffee cup carefully while the morning breeze carried the sound of traffic through the federal plaza. You said you work in federal law enforcement, Mitchell said. Which agency? Ethan answered without hesitation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mitchell gave a faint smile that revealed more disbelief than amusement. Do you carry identification proving that? Ethan nodded once. Yes, sir. My credentials are inside my jacket with my wallet. Convenient, Mitchell replied. Anyone can say they work for the FBI. Ethan did not argue. That is why credentials exist. Several people walking toward the building slowed their pace even further. Employees wearing federal identification badges quietly gathered near the entrance while pretending to check their phones. A delivery driver stopped beside his truck, watching from across the street. The entire plaza had become strangely quiet, as though everyone sensed they were witnessing something important without understanding exactly what it was. Mitchell spoke into his radio again. Dispatch, status on identity verification. The reply arrived through a burst of static. Still pending. The impersonation investigation is creating delays across multiple systems. Mitchell acknowledged the update before returning his attention to Ethan. Until I know exactly who you are not going anywhere. Ethan inclined his head respectfully. I understand your responsibility, officer. Mitchell frowned. You seem unusually comfortable with this situation. Ethan answered honestly. I have spent my career telling people to remain calm during stressful moments. It would be hypocritical if I forgot that lesson myself. The second officer quietly shifted his weight and glanced toward Mitchell. Something about Ethan's manner felt different from the confrontational encounters they usually experienced. There was no hostility in his voice, no attempt to leave, and no effort to provoke an argument. Even his breathing remained steady. Mitchell interpreted that discipline differently. You have rehearsed this before, have you not? He asked. Ethan looked genuinely puzzled. Rehearsed what? How to convince people you belong somewhere you do not. Ethan gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. No, officer. I simply believe respect makes difficult conversations easier. The answer lingered in the air. An older woman standing near the courthouse steps quietly lowered the phone she had been raising to record. A young intern whispered to a coworker that the man did not sound like someone inventing a story. Nearby, the security guard who recognized Ethan shifted uneasily once again. He knew exactly who Ethan was, but federal security protocols discouraged unnecessary interference during active law enforcement encounters unless safety required it. He chose to remain silent, hoping verification would arrive before the misunderstanding grew any larger. Mitchell noticed the guard watching but assumed he was simply monitoring the situation. Set your coffee on the ground, Mitchell instructed. Ethan carefully crouched just enough to place the paper cup beside his polished shoes before standing upright again, with both hands visible. Thank you, he said quietly. Mitchell looked at the messenger bag. What is inside? A laptop, case files, and paperwork for today's meetings. Any weapons? Ethan answered carefully. Nothing accessible. Everything I carry complies with federal policy. Mitchell folded his arms once more. The response sounded precise, almost too precise. To him, every measured answer reinforced the suspicion that this man had prepared for encounters exactly like this. Around the plaza, more people had begun watching from behind the glass walls of the federal building, their reflections blending with the bright morning sunlight. None of them realized that only a few minutes remained before a convoy would arrive carrying the one person capable of changing every assumption made that morning. Officer Ryan Mitchell took one slow step closer, his expression hardening as the minutes stretched without confirmation from dispatch. The growing delay only strengthened his belief that something was wrong. Around them, the federal plaza continued filling with employees arriving for work, yet almost no one walked past without stealing another glance at the unusual scene unfolding outside the building. Ethan Brooks remained exactly where he had been instructed, his hands visible, his shoulders relaxed, and his attention focused entirely on the officers. The untouched cup of coffee rested on the sidewalk beside his shoes, slowly cooling beneath the bright morning sun. Mr. Brooks, Mitchell said firmly, until we establish your identity, I need you to come with us and wait inside the patrol vehicle. Ethan nodded respectfully without showing frustration. Officer, I will cooperate with any lawful instruction. May I simply request that you continue verifying my credentials through the appropriate federal channels while we wait? Mitchell crossed his arms. That is already happening. Ethan answered quietly. Then I am confident everything will become clear. The confidence in his voice irritated Mitchell more than he expected. He had encountered nervous suspects, angry suspects, frightened suspects, and even deceptive suspects, but this man's calm certainty felt different. Instead of seeing it as the confidence of someone telling the truth, Mitchell interpreted it as the confidence of someone who believed he could outsmart the process. The second officer shifted uneasily beside the patrol vehicle. Ryan, he said in a low voice, he has not resisted anything. Mitchell kept his eyes on Ethan. Neither would someone who knows exactly how investigations work. Ethan heard the remark, but offered no response. Years of federal service had taught him that emotions rarely improved complicated situations. Across the plaza, more federal employees gathered quietly near the entrance. Some recognized Ethan immediately. Others simply assumed the officers had a valid reason for stopping him. The uncertainty spread through the crowd faster than any explanation could. An elderly maintenance worker looked toward the security guard standing inside the lobby. "Do you know that gentleman?" he whispered. The guard hesitated before answering softly. "I have seen him walk through those doors almost every morning for years." "Then why are they questioning him?" The guard slowly shook his head. "I do not know." Ethan glanced briefly toward the building before returning his attention to Mitchell. "Officer, there are security officers inside who can confirm my identity if necessary." Mitchell answered without hesitation. "I will decide which witnesses are appropriate." Ethan inclined his head once again. "Understood." A woman carrying a briefcase quietly stopped near the edge of the crowd. She recognized Ethan from several community events where he had spoken to local high school students about careers in public service. She started to step forward before deciding against it, uncertain whether interfering would make the situation worse. Nearby, several pedestrians quietly lifted their phones, while others simply watched in silence. Rumors began moving through the gathering crowd in whispers. Some believed the man had been caught pretending to be an agent. Others assumed an undercover investigation was unfolding. No one actually knew the truth. Mitchell looked toward the patrol vehicle. "Please walk over there." Ethan complied immediately, moving at an unhurried pace with both hands remaining clearly visible. He stopped beside the rear passenger door exactly where he was instructed and waited without complaint. The second officer opened the door but paused, noticing Ethan's remarkable composure. There was no panic, no anger, and no attempt to argue. It was as though Ethan trusted that facts would eventually overcome assumptions. Then, from somewhere beyond the intersection, the low synchronized sound of multiple powerful engines rolled through the downtown streets. Heads turned almost instinctively as a line of identical black sport utility vehicles approached the Federal Plaza with deliberate precision, their polished exteriors reflecting the morning sunlight, while every conversation around the scene faded into complete silence. The line of black sport utility vehicles rolled silently into the Federal Plaza before stopping with remarkable precision only a few yards from the patrol cars. Their glossy exteriors reflected the morning sunlight, while the small American flags mounted near the front of the federal building fluttered gently in the breeze above them. Every conversation across the plaza disappeared. Office workers paused halfway through the revolving doors. Delivery drivers stopped unloading packages. Even the pedestrians who had been quietly recording lowered their phones, sensing that whatever was about to happen carried unusual importance. Officer Ryan Mitchell glanced briefly toward the convoy before turning back to Ethan Brooks. "Remain where you are," he instructed. Ethan simply nodded. "I have not moved since you asked me to stay." His voice remained steady, neither defensive nor impatient. The second officer shifted uneasily beside the open rear passenger door of the patrol vehicle. The longer the encounter continued, the less certain he felt about the assumptions that had brought them there. Ethan's calm demeanor had never changed. His respectful tone had never slipped. Every instruction had been followed immediately. Mitchell noticed his partner's hesitation. "We are waiting for verification," he said quietly. "Nothing changes until we have facts." Ethan answered with quiet sincerity. "I agree completely." Those 4 words lingered in the silence far longer than anyone expected. One of the rear doors of the lead sport utility vehicle opened slowly. A woman wearing a tailored Navy business suit stepped onto the pavement with calm confidence. Her federal identification badge rested against her jacket, but she made no effort to display it dramatically. 2 additional federal personnel followed several steps behind, maintaining a respectful distance. The woman surveyed the scene only once before her eyes settled on Ethan. Her expression shifted from professional focus to unmistakable surprise. Without raising her voice, she began walking directly toward the gathering crowd. The federal employees standing near the entrance immediately recognized her and instinctively stepped aside. The security guard straightened his posture almost automatically. Even those who did not know her name sensed she held significant authority. Mitchell stepped forward to intercept her politely. "Ma'am, this is an active police investigation." She stopped a comfortable distance away and answered with complete composure. "I understand." Her eyes never left Ethan. "May I ask why Special Agent Ethan Brooks is standing beside a patrol vehicle instead of inside the federal building where he is expected?" The question seemed to freeze the morning itself. Mitchell blinked once, carefully processing what he had just heard. "You know this individual?" he asked. The woman looked at him with measured calm. "Know him," she replied. "He reports directly through my command structure." Ethan finally allowed himself the smallest smile of recognition. "Good morning, Director Reynolds." She returned the greeting with a brief nod. "Good morning, Agent Brooks. I apologize for your delay. We have an operational briefing scheduled in less than 20 minutes. Around the plaza, whispers spread almost instantly. Several employees exchanged astonished looks. The elderly security guard quietly closed his eyes for a moment, relieved that the truth had finally begun to surface. Mitchell remained silent. Every confident conclusion he had reached over the past several minutes suddenly felt far less certain than before. Before anyone could speak again, Mitchell's radio crackled sharply against his shoulder. Dispatch returned with an updated report. "Officer Mitchell, identity verification is nearly complete. Additional information has just been received regarding the impersonation suspect. Stand by for immediate confirmation." Mitchell slowly lifted the radio toward his mouth, but for the first time since the encounter had begun, he hesitated before saying a single word. Officer Ryan Mitchell slowly lowered the radio from his shoulder as every person in the Federal Plaza seemed to wait for the same answer. The dispatcher's voice returned one final time, calm and unmistakably clear. "Officer Mitchell, identity verification is complete. The individual you detained is confirmed as Special Agent Ethan Brooks of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Repeat, identity confirmed. The impersonation suspect has also been located several blocks east of your position. The suspect does not match your current contact." For a brief moment, no one moved. The words seemed to hang in the morning air long after the transmission ended. Mitchell stared at Ethan, replaying every decision he had made since stepping out of his patrol car. The confident certainty that had guided him only minutes before disappeared beneath the undeniable weight of the facts. Ethan remained exactly where he was, his posture unchanged, his expression calm, as though he had trusted from the beginning that the truth would eventually arrive. Director Victoria Reynolds stepped forward with measured confidence, her polished shoes echoing softly across the stone plaza. "Officer," she said respectfully, "Special Agent Brooks has served this bureau with distinction for more than a decade. He currently leads one of our most sensitive investigative teams in this field office." Mitchell listened without interrupting. Reynolds continued, not with anger, but with quiet authority. "Every federal employee entering this building knows Agent Brooks. His professionalism is one of the reasons younger agents look to him as an example." Around them, several employees nodded almost instinctively. A senior analyst standing near the entrance quietly whispered, "That is exactly right." Another agent who had just exited the building stopped in place, clearly surprised to see Ethan standing beside a patrol vehicle. "Morning, Ethan," he called naturally before noticing the silence surrounding everyone else. The simple greeting carried more weight than any identification card ever could. Mitchell looked toward the second officer, who slowly exhaled as the situation finally became clear. The uncertainty that had lingered throughout the encounter vanished all at once. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket only after Mitchell gave a small nod of permission. He carefully removed his leather credential wallet and opened it. The gold FBI badge reflected the bright morning sunlight, while the official identification card displayed his photograph, title, and bureau credentials. Ethan held it where Mitchell could examine it comfortably without taking another step. Mitchell studied every detail before gently closing the credential wallet and handing it back with both hands. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ethan accepted it with a polite nod and returned it to his jacket. He showed no satisfaction, no frustration, and no desire to embarrass anyone. Director Reynolds observed the exchange before speaking again. "Agent Brooks was scheduled to brief our regional task force this morning. His work has protected countless families across several states. Yet if you ask anyone in this building about him, they will probably tell you something different first." Mitchell looked at her. "What is that?" Reynolds smiled warmly. "They will tell you he is the first person to volunteer when someone needs help, the last person to take credit for success, and the calmest voice in every difficult room." Ethan lowered his eyes with quiet humility. "I have always believed that our work is bigger than any one person," he said softly. Reynolds nodded. "Exactly why you have earned the respect of everyone who serves beside you." The plaza, which only minutes earlier had been filled with suspicion and uncertainty, now felt entirely different. Conversations remained quiet, but the silence no longer belonged to doubt. It belonged to reflection. The morning breeze carried the sound of the American flag moving gently above the federal building while sunlight spread across the glass entrance behind Ethan. In that peaceful moment, every witness could see the difference between assumption and truth, and every uniform, every badge, and every title seemed less important than the character of the man who had never stopped treating others with dignity, even when dignity had not first been offered to him. Officer Ryan Mitchell stood silently for several long seconds, the morning sounds of the city gradually returning around him while he struggled to reconcile the man standing before him with the assumptions he had made only minutes earlier. The crowd that had gathered outside the federal building no longer whispered with suspicion. Instead, quiet conversations reflected surprise, relief, and reflection. Ethan Brooks calmly picked up the paper cup of coffee he had placed on the sidewalk earlier. It was no longer warm, yet he smiled faintly as though the forgotten cup represented nothing more than a minor inconvenience in an otherwise ordinary day. Director Victoria Reynolds watched him with familiar admiration before turning back toward Mitchell. "There is something else you should know," she said. Mitchell lifted his eyes respectfully. Reynolds continued in a measured voice that carried naturally across the plaza. 6 months ago, Agent Brooks coordinated an interstate operation that safely recovered dozens of missing children without a single unnecessary escalation. Last year, he received the Director's Award for Outstanding Public Service, and he accepted it only after insisting every member of his team stand beside him. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Director, none of that is important right now." Reynolds smiled gently. "Your humility is exactly why it matters." Several younger federal employees standing nearby exchanged proud smiles. One quietly remarked to another, "That sounds exactly like Ethan." Mitchell listened without interruption, every new detail making his earlier certainty feel more distant. The second officer beside him finally spoke. "Sir, I have heard his name during joint training sessions." Mitchell looked toward his partner in surprise. "You never mentioned that." The officer answered honestly. "I did not recognize him until Director Reynolds arrived. I only remembered the name after hearing it." Ethan looked toward both officers. "Mistakes happen in every profession," he said calmly. "What matters is how we respond once we recognize them." His words carried no trace of resentment. They were spoken with the same quiet sincerity that had guided every sentence since the encounter began. Mitchell slowly removed his patrol gloves and slipped them into his belt. The gesture seemed almost symbolic, as though he no longer wished to place any barrier between himself and the truth standing in front of him. Around the plaza, several people who had been recording quietly lowered their phones. What had first appeared to be a dramatic public arrest had become something entirely different. It had become a lesson unfolding in real time. A courthouse employee walked past Ethan and paused briefly. "Agent Brooks," she said with a warm smile, "thank you for speaking at my daughter's career day last spring. She still talks about it." Ethan smiled warmly. "Please tell her to keep asking difficult questions. That is how good investigators begin." The woman laughed softly before continuing inside the building. Mitchell watched the brief exchange with growing realization. Everywhere he looked, someone seemed to know Ethan, not because of his badge alone, but because of his character. The security guard who had remained silent throughout the encounter finally stepped outside and approached with quiet respect. "Good morning, Agent Brooks," he said. "Sorry your day started this way." Ethan simply smiled. "Tomorrow will be another morning." Director Reynolds glanced toward the entrance where additional FBI personnel were beginning to gather for the scheduled briefing. She checked her watch before looking back at Ethan. "We should head inside soon." Ethan nodded, then turned once more toward Officer Mitchell. There was no triumph in his expression, no desire to remind anyone of what had just happened. Instead, there was only the calm confidence of someone who believed that dignity was never measured by how people treated you during your hardest moments, but by how you chose to treat them in return. The bright morning sun reflected across the glass walls of the federal building, illuminating every face in the plaza as though the truth itself had quietly stepped into the light. Officer Ryan Mitchell finally stepped forward, removing his patrol cap before stopping a respectful distance from Ethan Brooks. The movement was simple, yet everyone watching understood its meaning immediately. The confident certainty that had guided him only minutes earlier had given way to quiet humility. "Agent Brooks," he began, his voice steady but noticeably softer than before, I owe you an apology. The Federal Plaza remained completely silent. Employees paused at the entrance, pedestrians stopped along the sidewalk, and even the officers standing nearby waited without speaking. Mitchell continued, I received a description, and instead of allowing the evidence to guide every decision, I allowed my assumptions to fill in the gaps before the facts arrived. You treated me with respect from the first moment we spoke, and I did not return that same respect to you. Ethan listened without interrupting. His expression remained composed, free from satisfaction or resentment. Mitchell looked down briefly before raising his eyes again. I also understand that this did not affect only you. Every person standing here witnessed our interaction. That matters, and I accept responsibility for it. Director Victoria Reynolds quietly folded her hands, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. She recognized that some lessons carried greater weight when spoken by the people who had learned them. Ethan nodded thoughtfully before answering. Officer Mitchell, every profession asks us to make difficult decisions with limited information. I understand that. Mitchell looked relieved for only an instant before Ethan gently continued. But every profession also asks us to remember that the person standing in front of us is more than a description on a radio. That responsibility belongs to all of us. Mitchell slowly nodded. You are right. Ethan offered a faint smile. The fact that you are willing to say those words publicly tells me your character is stronger than your mistake. Several people in the crowd quietly exchanged glances. The atmosphere had changed completely. What had begun with suspicion was now becoming something far more meaningful. The second officer stepped closer beside Mitchell. Agent Brooks, he said sincerely. I should have spoken up sooner when I began questioning our assumptions. I am sorry as well. Ethan extended his hand without hesitation. Thank you for saying that. The officer accepted the handshake gratefully. Mitchell hesitated only a moment before extending his own hand. Ethan met it with the same calm confidence he had shown throughout the morning. There was no hesitation, no attempt to embarrass him, and no trace of lingering anger. The handshake lasted only a few seconds, but it seemed to carry the weight of everything that had happened. Director Reynolds smiled quietly. That, she said, is how trust begins to return. A young federal employee, standing near the entrance, softly applauded once before realizing no one else had moved. The sound quickly faded, replaced instead by respectful silence. Somehow that silence felt more meaningful than applause ever could have. The elderly security guard who had watched the entire encounter since the beginning stepped forward with a warm smile. Agent Brooks, he said, your coffee has probably gone cold. Ethan looked at the paper cup still resting in his hand and laughed gently for the first time that morning. I suppose it has. The guard smiled. The cafe across the street knows you well. I am certain they would gladly make another. Ethan shook his head with quiet amusement. This one reminds me that every day can teach something unexpected. Mitchell looked at the cup, then back at Ethan. I hope one day we meet again under better circumstances. Ethan nodded warmly. I believe we will. Communities become stronger when the people serving them are willing to learn together. The morning breeze carried the sound of fluttering flags across the Federal Plaza as the tension that had gripped the scene finally disappeared, replaced by a quiet sense that integrity, accountability, and grace had all found a place beside one another before the doors of justice. The Federal Plaza gradually returned to its familiar rhythm as employees resumed their walk toward the entrance, and the small crowd quietly dispersed, carrying with them a story they would remember long after the morning had ended. Ethan Brooks glanced once more at the paper cup in his hand before dropping it into a nearby recycling bin with a faint smile. I suppose I have earned another cup of coffee, he said softly. A few people laughed, and the sound carried an unexpected warmth that dissolved the final traces of tension. Director Victoria Reynolds adjusted the folder beneath her arm and nodded toward the entrance of the FBI field office. Our briefing starts in 10 minutes, she reminded him. Ethan smiled. Then we should not keep everyone waiting. Before taking another step, he turned back toward Officer Ryan Mitchell one final time. The officer stood beside his patrol vehicle with a thoughtful expression, no longer seeing the morning as an embarrassing mistake to forget, but as an experience that would shape every decision he made from that day forward. Officer, Ethan said calmly. Thank you for listening when the facts finally arrived. Mitchell nodded respectfully. And thank you for giving me the chance to learn from them. Ethan extended his hand once more. Mitchell accepted it without hesitation, and the second officer quietly joined them with a grateful smile. No cameras flashed. No speeches were delivered. The simple exchange spoke for itself. Director Reynolds observed the moment with quiet satisfaction. "Every badge," she said gently, "represents responsibility before authority." Neither officer answered immediately, but both understood exactly what she meant. As Ethan and Director Reynolds walked toward the building, several federal employees greeted him naturally along the way. One analyst asked about the upcoming task force meeting. Another wished Noah good luck in his baseball season after remembering a conversation from the previous month. Ethan answered each greeting with the same humility that had defined every moment of the morning. Nothing about his demeanor suggested he had just experienced a public misunderstanding. To him, professionalism did not begin when circumstances were easy. It revealed itself when they were not. Inside the lobby, the elderly security guard smiled as Ethan approached. "Looks like your morning became more eventful than mine," he joked. Ethan chuckled quietly. "Let us hope tomorrow is much less memorable." The guard opened the security gate and nodded with genuine respect. "Have a good day, Agent Brooks." "You as well," Ethan replied before continuing toward the elevators beside Director Reynolds. Outside, Officer Mitchell remained standing for another minute, watching the glass doors close behind Ethan. He looked at the notebook in his hand before carefully writing a final sentence beneath the incident report, reminding himself that every investigation begins with facts but must always end with fairness. He quietly closed the notebook and slipped it into his patrol bag. The second officer climbed into the passenger seat without speaking. Neither man felt the need to fill the silence. The lesson had already been learned. High above the federal building, the American flag moved gently in the steady morning breeze, its reflection stretching across the glass facade where the sunlight had fully claimed the day. Beyond those windows, Ethan entered the conference room exactly as though nothing unusual had happened, greeting colleagues with the same quiet confidence and respect he offered everyone he met. Somewhere across town, Noah would later tell his classmates that his father always believed character mattered more than titles. He had no idea how profoundly those words had already been proven that very morning. And as the city continued its ordinary routine beneath a clear blue sky, the memory left behind was not one of accusation or misunderstanding, but of a man whose calm integrity reminded everyone watching that true honor is never announced by a badge, a title, or a uniform. It is revealed by the choices a person makes when the world gives them every reason to choose otherwise.